This was not the video that I wanted to do today. Doing a story about a guy with a serious injury is never fun, and that's especially true when it happens to one of the best up-and-coming point guards in the NBA. And only 7 games into his rookie season, too. If you haven't heard, Detroit Pistons point guard Killian Hayes sustained a torn labrum in his right hip during a game this week against the Milwaukee Bucks. This is a very serious injury that has a history of ending or at least seriously changing the trajectory of NBA players' careers. Man, I feel so bad for Pistons fans right now, and we're going to get into all that in today's video and explain this Killian Hayes injury and what it means. I need you to comment below, especially if you're a Pistons fan. I want to hear from you. Tell me, what's the mood in Detroit right now after this horrible Killian Hayes news? There's just no way to sugarcoat this news. It is very, very bad. Hayes started every game for Detroit this season. Before his injury, he was averaging over 4.5 points and 3.5 assists per game. All this in just over 20 minutes. These, of course, aren't huge numbers. They don't jump off the page, but the Pistons drafted Hayes based on his potential. And coming into the league, Killian Hayes was expected to be a project. At the same time, though, would not have been a surprise to anybody if within 5 years from now, he ends up being the best player from this draft class. That could still happen, but to be honest, history is not on his side with this injury. Let's get a better idea of what this injury is. So here we have a picture of your typical hip. As you can see, the hip is a ball and socket joint. That's what allows your leg to move in a 360-degree range of motion in that joint. So the labrum is thick cartilage inside the hip socket. It serves a couple of functions. First, it acts as a pretty tight seal, kind of like a vacuum seal of the hip joint. It really holds the hip into the socket. The labrum also acts as a shock absorber, kind of a cushion, like if you take a hit or maybe you land after a dunk. As I'm recording this, the Pistons haven't said how long Hayes is going to be out, but naturally you just have to assume that they're going to take their time with him and this injury because they've already invested so much in this player. It's also still unclear how severe the labrum tear is. If it's a serious tear, that could require surgery, which could mean months of recovery. If you're the Pistons, you've also got to be concerned about long-term effects with this type of injury. The most recent example of a hip injury similar to this one is when Isaiah Thomas sustained a right femoral acetabular impingement with labral tear during Game 2 of the Eastern Conference Finals in 2017. And we remember what happened to his career, just sent it into a downward spiral. He's currently out of the NBA. When he has played in the league since that injury, looks nothing like the MVP candidate that he used to be. I should say there's been no mention of a right femoral acetabular impingement with Hayes' injury like what Isaiah Thomas had. It's only been reported that Hayes has a tear in the labrum. Looking at players with just torn hip labrums, we have a few examples that we can go on. Do you remember the name Johnny Flynn? He was a point guard drafted 6th overall in 2009. He tore his hip labrum the summer before his second year in the league. He had surgery, but Flynn was never the same player, and he was out of the NBA by 2012. Gerald Henderson, who played most of his career with the Charlotte Bobcats, had surgery for a torn labrum after his second year in the league. After an 8-month recovery time, he averaged about 65 games over the next 3 years, mainly as a role player, but dealt with periodic hip pain. He eventually had 2 more hip surgeries to alleviate lingering pain. Henderson last played in the NBA in 2017 and has career averages of about 11 points per game. Wilson Chandler tore his hip labrum in 2012. He had surgery and returned to action about 6 months later, played 3 more seasons, managing that lingering hip pain that he still had, but he averaged about 60 games per season. He then tore his labrum again in 2015, so 3 years later, and missed the whole season. And do you remember Martell Webster? He was a solid player for the Portland Trail Blazers, former lottery pick. He played through hip pain by managing it with rest, steroid injections, but he ended up tearing his labrum in 2015, and Martell Webster has not played in the NBA since then. Kevon Looney of the Warriors is another example. He underwent surgeries on each hip his first 2 years in the league. He's had lingering hip issues ever since, though, and he even missed most of last year. The one positive outcome I could find is with LaMarcus Aldridge. He tore his hip labrum his freshman year of college, didn't have surgery, and went on to play his sophomore year before he turned pro. Then he tore his labrum again his 6th year in the NBA, and he's actually gone on to have relatively good hip health since then. So looking at these examples, the takeaway I'm getting is that a full recovery isn't necessarily guaranteed, and the chance for reoccurrence is pretty high, especially if a player is genetically predisposed to hip problems. We don't know if that's the case with Killian Hayes, but it's something to think about. Also worth noting, people do heal differently. People handle injuries differently. Maybe Hayes' youth will be a benefit to him in this case. But for a point guard who relies on speed, cutting, changing directions, this is really troubling news. That's all I've got for you today. Hopefully, I did a nice job of breaking this down, giving you a better understanding of what Killian Hayes is facing in the months and possibly years ahead. If you enjoyed this content, would appreciate if you drop a subscribe on this channel. Do NBA videos like this several times a week, always fresh and consistent content right here on the Half Court Report. Once again, my name is Troy. This has been the Half Court Report, and I'll see you next time.